What is your idea of an ideal weekend? Maybe some relaxing, have a nice meal, go to a concert or a movie, look through some old photos to reminisce on the good times you had back when you were first dating your spouse or when the kids were little. The teacher has a different idea. He says, it would be a really good use of our time this weekend if we crashed a funeral or two. Maybe you could go find a wise man to point out a bunch of things you're doing wrong in life. There's one at every party, right? Ecclesiastes wants you to think about life, but especially through the lens of your certain unstoppable impending death. As we've seen, the teacher's words are often unpleasant, but remember, that's the point. It's literally the point of the book. We talked about this in our very first study, but I realized we hadn't brought it back up in quite a while. The teacher's message is supposed to be like a sharp goad, a cattle prod. That's what the end of the book says. It says, hey, the teacher picked words on purpose to be a sharp stick, to prod us, to shepherd us toward God and the ultimate meaning and purpose that he wants for our lives. Because the book reveals that we want certain things for our lives. The world offers certain things to our lives, but they are not in line with what God wants for your life. And so he specifically picks these ideas, these images, these words to poke us with a sharp stick so that we will consider these things. Tonight's goads are consider adversity and how they might not be such a bad thing. Consider the fact that you are absolutely going to die one day. Consider that your life is part of the amazing, sovereign, ongoing work of God. And through those considerations, we can then put death and suffering and the wrinkles of daily life into proper perspective as we rise above the weight and pressure of the world under the sun and understand that life is about more than difficult experiences and sensations here in this life. As chapter 6 closed, if you were here last time, we saw that the teacher asked a couple of rhetorical questions. He said, man, who knows what is good? And what is the advantage for human beings, for human life? And then we move into this chapter, and tonight he's going to use the word better 8 times in our verses. And so he is going to start answering his question. Who knows what is good? Who knows what the advantage is for life? And he says, I can tell you some things that are an advantage, things that are better. And he does it 8 times. And he answers his questions with a series of proverbs. And if you notice, if you look at your Bible, even the way that the words are arranged looks different than the last chapter. The last chapter looks like narrative or looks like speech. And then this chapter looks like poetry because it is. These are arranged as proverbs are arranged. And in many ways, these verses tonight are really similar to what we would read just one book to the left, the book of Proverbs, also written by Solomon. But we'll find that our Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, they feel a lot different than the ones over to the left. There's a gloom to them. The teacher doesn't talk about wisdom the same way that he does in the other book. And that's because in this book, he's talking to us always from the earthly perspective, under the sun. The teacher in his lecture and in his experience and in his studies, he doesn't weigh in the heavenly. He doesn't weigh in eternity, eternal life, spiritual things as he measures out these problems in life. And so when he speaks about wisdom tonight, understand he means earthly knowledge and ingenuity, not the heavenly wisdom of righteousness. And that's why when he talks about wisdom tonight, we see he does not value the wisdom he's speaking about the way the book of Proverbs values wisdom. You get to the book of Proverbs and it's like, wisdom is the most important thing. Wisdom is the greatest treasure of all. Wisdom is undying. It sell everything you have. It's worth more than rubies, right? And you get here and it's like, yeah, wisdom's fine, I guess. And so this is one of those times where you look at the book of Ecclesiastes and it's like, what's going on here? Is this a contradiction? No, we just have to understand the context. And the teacher always speaks to us from a secular humanist perspective of someone who is searching for meaning in life but can't find it because this world cannot offer it. And he comes to the final conclusion like, oh, I can only find what I'm looking for through a personal relationship with the God who made me, loves me, and is in charge of my life. But even from the teacher's limited perspective, we are able to glean many helpful principles as we seek to live a life that matters and makes a lasting difference. So, we don't want to come to this and say, well, but we are believers, we are Christians, we know the answer to the question, we have the missing piece that the teacher doesn't have, so what do we care what he has to say? There's still a lot for us to apply here. Verse 1, a good name is better than fine perfume, and the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. At the time, perfume was more than just a nicety. It was a nicety, right? Because everybody smelled really bad and everything smelled really bad. I think we have no concept of just how bad life smelled all the time, every day, everything you did. And so, you know what? Perfume was really nice, but it was more than just about smelling a little nicer when everybody else smelled bad. Perfume at this time, it was a royal treasure, a decadent luxury that very few people had access to. You move forward centuries, right? And we see that scene where the woman goes to Jesus and she breaks her alabaster jar full of perfume, and the people in the room are aghast. How could she possibly waste this valuable treasure in this way? And so that's what we're talking about. This is treasure, right? But the teacher tells us that character, good character, is of much more lasting value than cologne. But it takes more time to distill a good name for yourself than it does a bottle of perfume. It takes a life of consistent, careful choices, both small and large. A life that is focused on sifting out the impurities, right? And that's part of what sanctification is about. Not that we make ourselves righteous, we don't make ourselves holy, but we participate with God as he trues us, as he refines us, as he sifts out those things that are worldly and makes us more like Jesus Christ. And so a good name, a person of high moral character and integrity, that is a very valuable thing. But as we all know from personal experience and from observation around us, the ingredients necessary to make a good name, a good life, is not always easy to acquire. It takes a lot of personal dedication and focus to say, I'm going to be the kind of person that is going to do what is right. The world is set up to encourage you to do what is wrong. The flesh within you is set up to make you want to do what is wrong. Even the Apostle Paul famously said, the stuff I actually want to do, I don't do it. And the stuff I don't want to do, that's what I find myself doing. And he talked about that struggle, about the fact that it's not our inclination to do what is right, to do what is good, to do what is holy, and yet it is the better thing. Next, the teacher says that your death day is better than your birthday. I don't know very many people that celebrate death day, right? We celebrate birthday every single year. Now, we know from last time and from previous studies that the teacher, as he goes through his travel journal here, as a student of life and as the ultimate expert on all of these things, we know that he falls into deep depression and despondency as he searches for meaning in life because he can't find it. He can't find it because he keeps saying, yeah, God exists, but that doesn't matter. Yeah, God created me, but that doesn't matter. I'm the master of my own life. I will get for myself all the things that I want, all of the power, all of the pleasure, all of the profit, all of these things, and he just can't get it ever. He keeps turning down all of these avenues and he never gets where he wants to go. And so we've seen that time and time again, he falls into despondency and gloom and depression, and he's in one of those periods right now. But that doesn't mean he's wrong about what he says here. In fact, he's right. It's true that the day of our death is better than the day of our birth, at least when it comes to us Christians. If you're a Christian here tonight, we may not look forward to the day of our death, but the day of your death is absolutely going to be a better day than the day of your birth. Why? Because we know that the day we die is the day that we step into eternal life, eternal reward, into the face-to-face presence with Jesus Christ, to be with him forever and ever. What did Paul say? He said it outright. To die is gain. That's a strange thing to say, but it's true. He said, I long to go and be with Christ, meaning I long to be dead, to meet my end of my mortal life so that I can put off this decaying mortal tent and take up immortality, which has been promised to me. But even though we look forward to that arrival, and even though we theologically recognize that the day of our death is better than the day of our life, we also know that this life, our mortal life, with all of its shortcomings, difficulties, disappointments, all of that, is still of immense value. Your life, your day-to-day has immense value. Why? God has given you your life on purpose, with purpose. Right? He says, hey, the Lord wants to be with us too. Jesus says, man, I'm looking forward to that day where I'm going to feast with you, my church, in heaven. So much so that Jesus says, I'm not going to eat of any of the fruit of the vine until everybody gets here. What a sweet thing. I mean, he's looking forward to seeing us, to receiving us, and saying, ooh, I can't wait for their death day so that I can receive them into glory. But meanwhile, Christianity is not a big suicide cult. A red flag if your religion is a suicide cult, just so you know, right? Jim Jones or the Comet people with their Nikes, right? Big red flag if they say, hey, we're all going to kill ourselves, right? So Christianity is not a suicide cult, but we recognize that our life is on purpose, God's purpose. He gives it to us for reasons, specific reasons that he has planned from eternity past just for you, so that he can do great and glorious things for you and through you and around you. Verse 2, it's better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, since that's the end of all mankind. The living should take it to heart. Do you know that right now, fewer than 47% of people want a funeral when they die? That's the current statistic that I could find as of 2023. And I know that it is true that it is a rising trend that people don't have funerals as often. And listen, just generally speaking, that's not a good thing. It's not a good trend for our society. In fact, it's a very bad trend for our society. We need funerals. We need memorial services for a lot of reasons. But one of the primary reasons is that at a funeral, everyone who attends is confronted with the one reality that most people work very hard to ignore. The reality that people refuse to face, and the fact that they will one day be buried, right? The living take it to heart as they look at the casket, as they look at the grave, or as they look at if there's no casket, if they look at the picture of the person who was walking with us and now is gone, right? And so it is such an important moment, not just for unbelievers, for believers too, but especially for unbelievers. And so I just want to encourage you, if possible, if you're a Christian, have a funeral service, have some sort of memorial service. Now, your family doesn't need to go bankrupt putting one on. Don't be one of these people that heaps incredible expense and burden onto your grieving family. That happens sometimes as people get ready to die, particularly, I would say, in my limited experience, people who don't have the hope of the resurrection and don't have the hope of heaven. A lot of times it's like they want this casket and they want this and that and the other thing, and because that's the last hurrah, right? Make my funeral, make me a pharaoh that is, being buried in a pyramid with all of this treasure. And man, families get so burdened and they have to pay all this money. So you don't need to do that. But have a funeral and have some kind of service. Because you know what? That hour may be the most spiritually impactful event of your whole life. You think, well, I'm not even there. That's right, you're not there. But that may be the great spiritual moment as far as your testimony, as far as your preaching, as far as your effectiveness. Most of us are called by God to just live a quiet and peaceable life, right? As far as I know, So far, none of us here have been called to, to be the missionary to some Amazonian tribe that's never heard the gospel, or to be a part of stadium evangelism, or to, write some song that the whole world sings, or something like that, right? And so sometimes we think, well, that's important stuff. Your life is important. And so even as you're living a quiet life, the Lord does great things through you. But one of the things that he might do through you is to just shine the light of your testimony at the day of your funeral, right? Because it is at that funeral, for that hour, that your faith, your testimony, your love for Jesus is put on display for your family and friends and coworkers and the community to see. None of them will try to shut you up. None of them will jeer you down or make fun of you. They sit there quietly and listen to what is preached. So number one, have a service. And number two, make sure that whoever is officiating that service is going to preach the gospel. Because that could be the most important moment of your sort of preaching life as a Christian with a testimony. And the gospel can be directly preached. No one is offended. Listen, this is part of my job. I think probably other than my dad, I've gone to more funerals probably than most everybody here, right? Because that's just part of the job. No one is ever... They may be offended inside, but they let me say right to them, you're going to die. What are you going to do about that? Do you know Jesus Christ? And so really important. And you know what? Even as a Christian, it's good for us to attend funerals because they provide us an opportunity to, number one, calibrate our perspective, put what really matters in life into perspective, to remind ourselves that those small and frustrating things sometimes aren't really that big of a deal when we're talking about life and death. And they also give us an opportunity to consider the work of God in a person's life, his faithfulness to his people. Go to a funeral service for a believer and say, man, the Lord is good. Look at what they did through all of these decades or through all of these situations and through this person's life and how he touched all of these other lives through that person. And so good to attend funerals. The teacher's not wrong. Feasts, on the other hand, are sort of the opposite. Now, feasting isn't bad in and of itself. It doesn't mean you can never have a good time and go to a birthday party or go to a feast. In fact, the teacher tells us 6 times in this book, he comes to this conclusion, hey, enjoy life, including enjoy like a good meal. Enjoy these things as a gift from God. But feasting, by definition, is sort of meant to distract, right? It's meant to take our mind off of other things and just put it on, man, this is great. I'm having a great time eating this meal. I'm having a great time in this company. Feasting is meant to keep us from serious thought for a few minutes, right? But life requires serious thought so that your life isn't just happening to you, so that we are making the most of this incredible gift God has given us for specific reasons. And this is why when you see people who are caught up in a party lifestyle, what are they doing? They just want to be distracted, going from one party to the next, from one substance to the next, from one sensual experience to the next, because they want that to happen to them and they want to block out the rest of life because life is about what they're feeling. But we understand that life is about much more than that. God has given you your life for a lot of specific reasons, and we are invited to discover what those reasons are and to walk in them. Verse 3, grief is better than laughter, for when a face is sad, a heart may be glad. The heart of the wise is in a house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of pleasure. Busy with laughter and pleasure, the fool forgets to ask the question, what's going to happen when time runs out? What's going to happen when the good times stop rolling? When the money is gone? When my beauty fades? When my health breaks down? What then is my life adding up to? The party life is all about you only live once, right? And that mindset ignores the hard stop at the end, that we are all headed toward a very definite period, a hard stop, the end of the book. And so the fool in this party lifestyle in this passage is all sense and no substance. And the teacher never lets us get far in this book without reminding us death is coming. It might be right behind you. Whoa. It's like one of those things you turn around and he's right behind me, isn't he? Yes, he is, right? And the teacher really wants to confront us with our own mortality. Moses, in his psalm, Psalm 90, he wrote this important line that lines up with what Solomon is saying here. Teach us to number our days carefully so that we may develop wisdom in our hearts. That's the idea, numbering our days. Not in a morbid way, not in a, gross, death-loving way, but recognizing that I have a certain number of days. I don't know how many there are, but let me number them because my life matters and I've been given these days for specific reasons, and I get to discover what those are as I walk with God and follow him and as he reveals truth to me. The average American will live a little more than 27,700 days. How many of you lived? Everybody in here, by my quick overview, has lived at least 5,000 days, right? When I put those numbers in there, 5,000 out of 27,000, that's kind of a lot. Actually, I've lived 15,219 days. I'm on the back half, assuming I live as long as the average American, which we all know I'm not guaranteed by any stretch of the imagination. Now, the Bible doesn't present these ideas to scare us, although some people, unbelievers, need to have a little shock therapy and know that, hey, days are ticking down. But that's not why Moses says that. It's not, God doesn't want you to be scared about that. It's just that your life matters. Your days matter. And the reality of this fallen world is that the outer man is perishing right now. You have an appointment with death, and it is a very important appointment to prepare for and to recognize that it's coming. Let me get ready. If you knew that you were having a certain interview, if you were going to be interviewed by, a king or a president, if you knew that you were going to have an interview for the job of your dreams and you get one shot at it, you would prepare, you would get ready, you would make sure that date is set out, right? And that's the idea here. Verse 5, it's better to listen to rebuke from a wise person than to listen to the song of fools. For like the crackling of burning thorns under the pot, so is the laughter of the fool. This too is futile. So to the young party animal, the wise man is just a stuffed shirt, a wet blanket, party pooper. But the teacher really is trying to help. He's trying to help people not make the same mistakes he did. Remember the opening chapters. He said, here's what I did. I lived the party life, the rich life, the accomplishment life, the human life to a further extent than any one of you could ever hope to dream. And he says, and every single time it was a dead end. Every single time I was left empty. Every single time I woke up in the dark and realized I'm nothing. I've got no satisfaction. There's no purpose to my life. He speaks from a place of expert disappointment. And he's trying to help people avoid the same failure. His whole goal is that we avoid the dead ends that he ran into again and again and again, decade after decade after decade. Think of all the pop songs ever written, but about how tonight is the night, right? Oh, the things we're going to experience. We're going to feel so alive. On a whim, I went and said, what is the number one Billboard, top 100 song right now, right? I just said, what is it? And it's some song I've never heard of from a band I've never heard of. It's called A Bar Song, and it's about how the singer should just drink till they pass out, then wake up and drink some more. How there's no point in working and there's no point in worrying about the problems of life because there's more Jack Daniels for them and there's a party downtown. Let's get there and let's go and drink all night. And then they just repeat that over and over and again. And then that's it. That's the number one song filling the airwaves right now. The problem is that song, just like all the others that the teacher's talking about, is, as some translate it, nettles under the kettle, just thorns under the pot. The song doesn't last. There's no heat. A lot of noise, a lot of popping, a lot of crackle, but no heat, no energy. It's hevel. It's just not anything. It's just smoke. It's just a waste of breath. It's better to listen to a rebuke from a wise person. Now, rebuke means when someone points out to you that you've messed up in some way. Now, none of us like being rebuked, but it can be a very helpful thing. One commentary writes that a rebuke heals and strengthens even while it wounds. And that's true. Verse 7, surely the practice of extortion turns a wise person into a fool, and a bribe corrupts the mind. So far we've seen, okay, this is better than that, funeral better than party, rebuke better than the top 40, and we can kind of think about it almost as shoppers looking at different products. I should do this instead of that, right? But here there's a new significance, because this is not just about what we might choose or experience, this is about who you are becoming. In verse 7, we see a wise person turn into a fool. That should make our blood turn cold as we go through this book. How do they become a fool? Well, they went down the road of loving money and valuing a life of pleasure and ease. That's why they're extorting people. That's why they're taking a bribe. They decide, this is what I want, and here's a shortcut for me to get there. And so they become people of low character who extort and bribe to get what they're looking for. And their minds then become corrupted by the hevel of the world. And now they are the fools singing and laughing and dragging the world down around them. But is this person in verse 7 going to have a good name on the day of their death? What are they going to smell like at their funeral? They've got shelves full of perfume and party favors and other worldly treasures, but in the end, their life will be a miscarriage. That's like what the teacher talked about last time. He said he looked at his life, all of his accomplishments, all of his wealth, all of his power, all of his everything, and he said, oh no, my whole life is a miscarriage. What am I going to do? Verse 8, the end of the matter is better than its beginning. A patient spirit is better than a proud spirit. We'll hang in there with a book or a movie with a lackluster beginning, maybe a slow start. But when an author messes up the final chapter, that is unforgivable. When the movie just tanks in the third act, it's really infuriating, right? Christians are supposed to care about finishing well. Paul talked a lot about this. Acts 20, 1 Corinthians 9, Philippians 3, 2 Timothy 4. So many believers don't finish their race the way they wanted to when they first started their race. And especially today in the era of, instant information on the internet, social media, all of that, the world is only too happy to always give examples of Christians not finishing well. Not that we should cover it up, we shouldn't, but we are seeing this always in real time playing out. Prominent Christians, famous, preachers and things like that who do not finish well, and it's a terrible thing. Now, of course, it is God who completes the work he began in us. It is God accomplishing his purposes through his power. It is God who sanctifies. It is God who is the victor, and we share in his victory. But the fact of the matter is that we as runners are able to slow to a crawl in our pace as we follow him, or get lost in the woods as we go off track, or disqualify ourselves from certain prizes in our walk with the Lord. Those are things that we can do. So it's when we see a prominent Christian fall, into sin or not finish well, it's not because God has failed to do what he promised. It's because they said, hey, I know the race told me to turn right, but what if I just jumped into this ditch over here? That sounds really fun. That's the idea. According to this proverb in verse 8, one way for us to aim toward finishing well as God's people is valuing patience over pride. As commentator David Hubbard puts it, we should care about length rather than height. That was an important or a helpful image to me, that in the Christian life, I should care about length, not height. It's not about whether my Christianity leads to big numbers or great fame or fantastic feats. Did I run the race the Lord gave me? Did I finish well? Did I arrive at the destination he plotted out for me? Did I care about patience and faithfulness, or did I care about pride? Height rather than length. Verse 9, don't let your spirit rush to be angry, for anger abides in the hearts of fools. I like to think that my anger is justified, that it's always that righteous indignation just like Jesus had. But it's not true. In fact, that's almost never true. Instead, I should endeavor to be more conformed into the image of the Lord, who is slow to anger and abounding in love. There is a time to be angry, but it's way less often than I try to tell myself. Hubbard again writes, anger, which we all feel at times, will rarely improve our circumstances. It can, however, ruin our chance at any joy and can rain on the parades of everyone around us. Well, what about injustice? What about wickedness? What about the evil and the wrongs going on in the world around us? Yep, that's all real. We don't have to pretend like those things aren't happening. We don't just ignore it. But the wise man is neither naive nor cynical and embittered. There's a balance there. Verse 10, don't say, why were the former days better than these, since it's not wise of you to ask this. This is a very interesting proverb. There is always an idea lurking in the back of our minds and in our culture that we could just return to a better time in our society's past or our personal past and we'll regain the good life. That's what nostalgia is. That's what a lot of marketing and a lot of products are based upon. Your nostalgia for something in the past. Were the golden days better? Sure, maybe, sometimes in some ways. In other ways, not so much. We usually dismiss those parts of the memory, right? But even if they were better, it doesn't matter because you're here and now and we can't time travel. And sometimes nostalgia is just straight lying to you in very dangerous ways. There were the Israelites wandering in the wilderness. What did they say? Oh, if only we could go back to Egypt. Man, those were good times, weren't they? When you were enslaved for 400 years and they were killing your baby boys by throwing them into the river, such good times. They were such good times. No, it wasn't. That's nostalgia lying to you. Or there were the Jews with Ezra and Nehemiah, returned back from captivity in Babylon for 70 years. If only this temple was as nice as the last temple. Oh, they're crying, right? Nostalgia. You mean the time when the kings of Israel and Judah were destroying the whole country with idolatry and perversion and corruption and immorality? Yeah, those were the days. Solomon's temple. Okay. As Christians, we should know the past and learn from the past, even value much of the past, but we can't live in the past. Instead, we should always remind ourselves that the best is yet to come. Not in this life, but in the next. Heaven is coming. Eternity is coming. Freedom from sickness and sin and difficulty and death and sorrow and disappointments. It's all coming. And it's wise for us to think on that. Instead of living in the past, how then should we live? That's the question Paul poses us in 1 Thessalonians 4. And he says, here's some principles for how you should live. Number one, live in the hope of the future arrival in heaven with the Lord. Think about how that's going to happen. And as you think about that, live this way in sanctification and holiness to the Lord and in love for the brothers and sisters around you, to live a quiet life, work hard, just look forward and not back. That's how we should live. Verse 11, wisdom is as good as an inheritance and an advantage to those who see the sun. Because wisdom is protection as silver is protection. But the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of its owner. Remember, when the teacher talks about wisdom, he's not meaning heaven's eternal wisdom. He means human wisdom. And we see the hint right there, those who see the sun. He's always giving us these markers. He's talking about human know-how, ingenuity, expertise, knowledge. And human wisdom isn't always bad. In fact, it can really help out sometimes. Don't touch a downed power line, right? That human wisdom might preserve your life. And so human wisdom can be an advantage on a limited level, just like money can help out. But they cannot guarantee you anything. In fact, as we've seen, wealth might actually cost you your life, right? Oh, there's a rich person. Well, robbers might want to come and kill you over it. But as you live, it's good to be thoughtful and rational and knowledgeable. It's generally going to help. It just cannot guarantee you satisfaction or eternal life. We need over the sun wisdom for those guarantees. Proverbs 12:28 says, there is life in the path of righteousness, that's heaven's wisdom, and in its path there is no death. So if we want the guarantees that we really need, you have to go to heaven's wisdom and God's way of doing things. Verse 13, consider the work of God, for who can straighten out what he has made crooked? What's that about? Crooked here is not referring to moral crookedness, because in the Lord there's no darkness at all. He doesn't do anything crooked. Rather, the teacher means when we look at life and we're like, that's a lot of weird twists and turns. Life seems tangled up. It seems awkward. I feel like there's a lot of rough sailing going on in my life. In those moments, we can sometimes get so wrapped up in ironing out our lives and trying to fix things that aren't to our liking. But the teacher invites us to stop and consider whether what is going on is actually the work of God in our lives. He says, hey, hold on. Adversity, difficulty, these different left turns that you think, I don't want to go this way, just pause and consider whether this is maybe the work of God in your life. What is God doing in your life right now? If you find yourself thinking, I don't think he's really doing anything in my life right now, the teacher would say, oh, yes, he is. Yes, he is. You just need to discover it. Maybe we're distracted from seeing his work because we're trying to cut a path through, a culvert that he wants us to turn along his road. We say, no, I'm going to go this way. I'm going to take the low road. I'm going to go through the forbidden woods here, and that'll be a shortcut for me. James Smith writes, man should concentrate on reflecting God's will and how he may bring his life into conformity with that divine will. Verse 14, in the day of prosperity be joyful, but in the day of adversity consider. God has made the one as well as the other so that no one can discover anything that will come after him. So an overall theme in the last two main passages has been prosperity isn't always good and adversity isn't always bad. They're both aspects of life that serve God's purposes as he accomplishes his plan in and through our lives. As we walk with God, we're going to encounter the full spectrum of experience in life. Good things, and by that I mean things that we feel like, oh, that's a good thing, and things that we feel like, that's a bad thing. There's a wide spectrum of life. And rather than resist it, we should react as Christians who say, okay, I really understand what's going on in the world. I really understand what's going on in human history. I really understand what God is trying to do through my life and the lives of the people around me. Maybe I don't know all the details particular to what's going on, but I have wisdom from God, perspective from God, the mind of Christ. And so as I live through these experiences in life, I can pause and say, okay, let's put this into perspective. Let's remember. Let's consider the work of God. Let's ask God what his opinion is. Let's see things the way he sees them. We would be wise to consider rather than constantly try to distract ourselves from things we'd rather not do or think about or confront ourselves with. That doesn't mean we're not allowed to have fun or embrace the lighter side of life. The teacher is in a deep gloom in these passages, but remember, he commands us 6 times to enjoy life as a gift from God, even the small day-to-day things. But tonight, the message is your life has a fixed number of days. Your life is going to end. When it's over, what will your life have been? We should give it serious thought because life is too precious, too important, too eternal for us to waste.